Gordon has been engaged in this kind of progressive political work since the late 1960s. He's the founder and the director of the Parkland Institute, what we here in BC like to call our sister organization of the CCPA. He teaches political economy. He's the author of 5 books, including Open for Business, The Roots of Foreign Ownership in Canada, and he is on the Council of Canadians Board of Directors. Most recently, he's been working very hard to expose deep integration on the Security and Prosperity Partnership, focusing, of course, on the energy side of that, energy sovereignty. Last spring, he so annoyed the Conservative chair of the Foreign Trade Committee that the poor man tried to shut him up and declared that what he was saying was irrelevant. Of course, it didn't work, and Gordon actually got far more publicity than if he'd just been allowed to say his piece. And tonight, Gordon will tell you what he was trying to tell the committee, and that is that NAFTA and now the SPP are a dire threat to Canada's energy security, and that we had better do something about it. Please welcome Gordon Laxer.
I think we're entering an era that is ripe for paradigm shift. I'm actually quite hopeful about this. The possibilities for a major progressive turn are there, and for regaining Canadian sovereignty and having real international solidarity, I think, are high. I can feel it in the air. I've been around for over 40 years, involved in politics. I've seen a couple of waves. And when the winds are blowing in our direction, and we've made headway. I'm old enough to remember when we won Medicare. So we must seize the openings when the possibilities are there. And in confronting the formidable circumstances and corporations and ideology that we're up against, we can also move in a way to recreate society so that we emphasize the important things in life: self-development, good collective supports, safety, preserved nature, and social justice. What the other side offers are the shallow things of life, more and more mindless consumer goods that ruin the environment and don't make anybody happy. The idea, of course, of endless growth in a finite world is an oxymoron. Now, I'm not a Pollyanna. I'm not going to sell you all kinds of glad tidings and rosy endings. A progressive turn is by no means inevitable. The end of the era of cheap fossil fuels, and we're just coming to the end of the era of cheap fossil fuels, and the looming impacts of climate change challenge us all from whatever end of the spectrum, political spectrum we're on. The right has answers, and their answers are business as usual, but it has no good answers to these challenges. They, of course, are attempting to bamboozle people with lights and mirrors. Greenwashing to have business as usual, and corporate profits uber alles, as at the expense of workers in the environment. Carbon trading, carbon capture, minor changes, revolutionary changes like 7 or 8 cents extra for a liter on the gasoline is going to really change people's behavior incredibly. That your government announced last week, and touting it as revolutionary. Well, the right has no good answers to energy security for Canadians. It has no good answers for transitioning to a post-carbon society with guaranteed access for energy for everyone. And that is really important, that the poor must continue to have access to energy. They have no good answers to curtailing greenhouse gases, because any answers, real answers, will massively hurt their profits and the whole capitalist system. Well, the question is, do the progressives and the left have answers? And that's what we'll be looking at tonight. I'm not going to answer all of the questions, but I think I have some partial answers about energy sovereignty and the environment. Before we get to them, I want to look at a few favorable signs, because I'm going to be talking about the energy situation, but I'm also going to be talking about the framing of issues and how to win the progressive side, the sovereign side, and pro-environment. Well, okay, straws in the wind. 4 of them. It was quite interesting that in the primary in Ohio that Hillary Clinton was asked a question about NAFTA, what she would do about NAFTA. And she said that she would renegotiate on environment and labor clauses. And then Barack Obama did one better. He said that he would have that clause that any party can give notice, 6 months' notice, to pull out of NAFTA. And that he would use that as a way of getting, to reopen NAFTA. Well, this is really interesting, and it's a great opening for us, because many of us have been talking about doing something about NAFTA, about renegotiating or getting rid of NAFTA, but it has always been portrayed by the media as a hypothetical question. What can you do? It's not on the agenda. Canada can't do this. Well, it is now on the political agenda. And it's interesting when the Canadian government makes the response. David Emerson here, the minister from Vancouver, your minister who crossed the floor there, he said that, of course, if the Americans pull out, they're going to lose their sweet deal of getting this guaranteed energy from Canada. Well, that's a two-edged sword, because the more they say what a good deal the Americans are getting from Canada, the more we can say what a rotten deal we have that we have to send all this energy to the United States. So, I mean, what they're trying to do is bludgeon the American government to not reopen, but we can use that as an opening for our own causes. In January, there's another straw in the wind. There was some major transnational oil companies, including Exxon and Shell, sent a secret letter to Premier Stelmach in Alberta calling for a partial moratorium in the tar sands to leave about 9 or 10% of the area of the tar sands to nature. They teamed up with Pembina Institute. Now, this is much more of a call, much more rhetoric than it is a reality. But it is interesting that the oil companies actually have done that, because it gives legitimacy to the calls for a moratorium. It was, in fact, just 2 years ago that Parkland Institute came out with a report called Fueling Fortress America. We published it with the CCPA and with Polaris Institute. And it was at that press conference, so Hugh McCullum was the author of that, that I just kind of at the spur of the moment, I said, we need a moratorium on all new tar sands plants, and I was considered incredibly far out. This is way out in left field. That actually sparked the debate. I mean, Premier Lougheed, the former Premier Lougheed, was coming out a few months later saying that we have to really slow down the tar sands. The mayor of Fort McMurray was actually calling for a moratorium, and it started to grow. So now, I mean, I think the oil companies are doing this. I mean, I'd like to see an analysis. I haven't seen a serious analysis of this. Is it the oil companies that actually have plants there and they want to keep out the competition? Is that the reason why they're doing it? And they can also greenwash themselves, their image at the same time. But the fact that they are moving in terms of rhetoric gives legitimacy for the progressive movement. I'm also very pleased by the extraordinary reaction to the report, Freezing in the Dark, Why Canada Needs Strategic Petroleum Reserves. Parkland Institute published this 5 weeks ago, the end of January. And it's had a very interesting run, and elicited, just sparked debates, especially in Eastern Canada. The interesting thing was that we had a press conference. Judith, my wife, is here. As she remembers, I came home very discouraged. We had a press conference. It was the first press conference in Parkland history where no journalist came to it. Not one. We're part of the University of Alberta. Not even the university newspaper came. So that didn't look very good. But I suppose to talk about running out of oil in Alberta seems a total absurdity. It doesn't seem as absurd in Eastern Canada, where the Atlantic Canadians and Quebecers, they import 90% of their oil from offshore, from foreign countries. And that's where it sparked the biggest reaction. For example, the day after the report came out, the Minister of Energy of New Brunswick was studying it, was talking about it seriously, saying that we need natural gas, that all of this natural gas is coming through, Nova Scotia gas is coming through New Brunswick, going straight to the States. They're not even getting it. And in northern New Brunswick, they want natural gas. They want the Quebec, the pipeline. There's a natural gas pipeline from Western Canada that goes all the way to Quebec City, but it doesn't go into Atlantic Canada. But it was in the next week in Quebec that was really sparked. The most influential newspaper in Quebec is Le Devoir, and the report was page one story. And it was page one story 3 days later as well. And in fact, for 4 days, it was in the first 4 pages of Le Devoir. And it raised, we talked about strategic petroleum reserves, which are temporary reserves when you, for shortage of oil, 90 days supply. But it sparked not only just a debate about that, and that Quebec needs that, but about liquefied natural gas terminals, how they may be relying much more on gas from Russia and Algeria. Here is the crazy situation. We have put a debate on energy into the deep freeze the last 25 years. We have not had a debate, 20 years since the free trade agreement. Everybody is terrified of awakening the anger of Albertans and the oil companies, and so they don't even touch it. But in Quebec, there's been no debate. So, but the story, what they said in Le Devoir the second time the story ran, was that there are liquefied natural gas terminals being planned for near Quebec City to bring in gas from Russia or Algeria. And the argument had been they went through committees, hearings, and the argument was that this was going to increase the security of supply for Quebec because they would have a diversity of supply. They would be getting it from Western Canada, but they could also get it from Russia and Algeria. Well, there was a professor at Laval, and this was in the report in Le Devoir, said that, in fact, it was going to decrease Quebec's security because what was going to happen was that if Quebec takes half its gas from offshore, then that extra gas that they've been buying from Western Canada would be exported to the United States. And then instead of Canada exporting 60% of our natural gas, which is what we do now, let's say we go up to 70%, there is a proportionality clause in NAFTA which says that as soon as you raise that, the Americans then have guaranteed supply of that percentage of Canadian gas. And when the Quebecers wanted to buy it back, they could not. And then they would be stuck with getting gas from Russia and Algeria. And you remember what Russia did to Ukraine and Belarus in the last couple of years, used natural gas as a weapon. So the opposition parties in Quebec were calling for a commission on energy security for Quebec and for strategic petroleum reserves. There was also a story, half-hour story in The Current on strategic petroleum reserves. And I had an op-ed in the Globe and Mail. Michael Ignatieff called me up and spoke to me for 20 minutes because the Liberal Party was interested in this stuff. The NDP moved a motion in the House. I mean, here, we had started off, I came home, nobody's come to our press conference about this report. And it sparked all of this. There is something there that is being sparked. Well, a couple of another. I got a call from Newfoundland, a reporter, and he had read about the report from the Winnipeg Free Press, Ivan Morgan, from the story by Francis Russell in Winnipeg Free Press. And so, even without reading the report, he calls up the energy minister in Newfoundland and said, do you think that Newfoundlanders should have first access to Newfoundland oil? And then they're amazed. I mean, here's the situation in Newfoundland. They have a refinery. It come by chance, not too far from St. John's. And they import totally foreign oil to refine there. And all Newfoundland oil, no Newfoundland oil is refined in Newfoundland. It's sent to places like Philadelphia and the Caribbean. Here, Atlantic Canadians, and certainly including Newfoundlanders, half of them use furnace oil to heat their homes. And they import it more and more from OPEC countries, Algeria being number one, Iraq number two, and Saudi Arabia number three. Now, how secure is that? So here we have, the Canadian government isn't talking about this at all. At all. The Americans go on and on about energy security and how they're going to have to get off Middle East oil. And of course, they're relying tremendously on Canadians to do this. We are the number one exporter of oil to the United States. We're ahead of Mexico and Saudi Arabia. And so that's what the government is so focused on that. I wrote the National Energy Board in May of last May. And the National Energy Board was set up in 1959 with its mandate to guarantee energy security for Canadians. That's what their mandate is. I wrote them and I said, have you done any studies on strategic, because I wanted to get the studies. And their first line they wrote back was, we have done no studies on energy security for Canadians. So if you think that the Canadian government is there looking after Canadians who, do you remember the bumper sticker in the early 1980s, that popular bumper sticker in Alberta? I'm not too proud of this one. Let the eastern bastards freeze in the dark. Remember that? That was a popular. Well, that inspired me for the title of the report and the book I'm writing too, Freezing in the Dark. Well, that is exactly, of course, what could happen. I know you people, you're not really Canadians out here. You don't have real winters. Listen, I cycle to work every day in Edmonton. Anyways, you won't freeze in the dark out here, but most Canadians certainly could in a wintry storm. So the interesting, the other thing is that so that's another straw in the wind. A fourth one, and this is really interesting. Murray started off with the Parliamentary Committee on the Security and Prosperity Partnership.